When the elderly black woman arrived at the wedding, the bride's family barely acknowledged her, but by the end of the night, they would be begging for her forgiveness. The late afternoon sun poured over the Montgomery estate like liquid gold, washing the marble fountains, trimmed hedges, and towering oaks in a warm glow. Everything about the scene spoke of wealth, understated but deliberate. Rows of white roses framed the cobblestone paths, and crystal chandeliers dangled from branches wrapped in ribbons of ivory silk. A live quartet played softly near the main terrace while servers glided between clusters of guests with trays of champagne. This was not merely a wedding. It was a performance, a spectacle designed to impress. Olivia Montgomery, radiant in a gown of intricate lace and pearls, was the picture of poise. Her groom, Michael Carter, stood tall beside her, sharp suit, calm smile, the kind of man whose quiet confidence hinted at a life built through perseverance rather than inheritance. Together they looked like a fairy tale brought to life, the union of two worlds, old money and hard-earned success. But beneath the laughter, the glittering glassware, and the gleam of wealth, something else simmered, an unspoken hierarchy, a quiet tension that no music could mask. That tension sharpened when Evelyn Carter stepped out of the sleek black car. She moved with the kind of grace that didn't demand attention but commanded it anyway. Her silver curls shimmered in the light, framing a face lined not by weakness but by wisdom. Her navy dress was simple yet dignified, her pearl earrings understated. Everything about her spoke of quiet pride. Michael, ever the gentleman, extended his hand to help her. "Careful there, Grandma," he said with a grin. Evelyn smiled back. "I'm careful by nature, darling. The world's taught me to be." She took a deep breath as she surveyed the gathering, hundreds of elegantly dressed guests, conversations humming with the cadence of privilege. Somewhere among them she saw her grandson's bride, glowing and beautiful, surrounded by her family. And then Evelyn felt it, that familiar chill. Not a single member of the Montgomery family had come to greet her. Victoria Montgomery, the bride's mother, stood at the top of the stone steps near the grand entrance, her manicured fingers curled delicately around a crystal wine glass. When her eyes found Evelyn, her smile faltered, replaced by a look of faint disapproval, the kind that passed for politeness in her world. "Well," Victoria murmured to her sister beside her, her voice light but laced with venom, "some people mistake modesty for refinement." A few quiet laughs followed. Evelyn heard them, but her face remained serene. She'd lived through harsher words and harsher times. What were a few whispers at a wedding compared to a lifetime of endurance? Michael's expression darkened, his jaw tightening. "Ignore them," he muttered. Evelyn touched his arm softly. "I always do," she said with a smile that carried more power than any insult could undo. Some lessons take people longer to learn. As the ceremony began, Evelyn found her seat near the edge of the gathering, her view partially obscured by a column of roses. No one offered to move for her. No one spoke. She folded her hands in her lap and listened to the vows as the wind rustled through the trees. When Olivia said "I do," Evelyn smiled, not because of the words but because of the way Michael looked at her. That kind of love, she thought, was rare. After the applause and cheers, the celebration shifted to the reception lawn. A soft glow from lanterns filled the air, and the smell of jasmine mingled with laughter. Guests mingled easily, their champagne glasses flashing under the lights. Evelyn moved quietly among them, always polite, always gracious, and always met with the same thin smiles that disappeared the moment she turned away. At one table, Victoria's voice rose above the hum. "Michael's done well for himself," she said sweetly, "considering where he came from." Evelyn, seated a few tables away, felt the words strike like tiny stones. She didn't flinch. Richard Montgomery, Olivia's father, gave a curt nod in agreement. "Yes, quite. Remarkable, really. Not many from that background reached this level." He didn't elaborate on what that background meant. He didn't need to. Evelyn stirred her tea, her expression composed. Years had taught her not to waste energy correcting the narrow-minded. Dignity, she knew, was the quietest kind of power. When a waiter passed by, offering a tray of hors d'oeuvres, Evelyn smiled kindly and took one. The young man returned her smile, the first genuine one she'd received all night. Michael noticed the glances, the whispers, the way his grandmother was gently exiled to the fringes of the celebration. He tried to intervene, but Evelyn stopped him with a look. "Don't you dare make a scene, child," she whispered. "This isn't new to me. Let them show who they are." Her calmness was unnerving. Olivia, radiant and beautiful, floated between tables, thanking guests and accepting compliments. But even she seemed hesitant when she reached Evelyn's side. She hugged her briefly, a polite, careful gesture, and whispered, "I'm so glad you came." Evelyn smiled. "Wouldn't miss it for the world, dear." But Olivia didn't stay. She drifted away quickly as though unsure how to balance love and appearances. As dusk deepened, the lights grew brighter. The reception became a whirl of laughter, music, and glittering conversation. To anyone looking from afar, it was perfect. To Evelyn, it was hollow. At one point, a guest seated near her, a middle-aged woman in diamonds, asked casually, "And you are?" "Evelyn Carter," she said warmly. "Michael's grandmother." The woman's expression froze for a fraction of a second. "Ah, lovely," she said, her voice thin. "How wonderful for you." Evelyn only smiled. "It truly is." Then she turned her gaze toward the horizon, where the sun had dipped below the trees. She remembered another wedding many decades ago in a smaller town with fewer roses and far more heart. She'd worn the same pearl earrings then. Life had been simpler and harder, but people had been kinder. The Montgomery estate gleamed like a temple of privilege, but she knew what she saw beneath the polish: insecurity dressed as pride. Across the garden, a man she hadn't noticed before was watching her. He was older, well-dressed, with eyes that carried the weight of experience. Unlike the others, he didn't look through her. He looked at her, with curiosity, perhaps even respect. When she caught his gaze, he nodded once and she returned the gesture with a knowing smile. The night carried on. Guests danced beneath chandeliers suspended from the trees, their laughter echoing through the open air. Victoria glided across the lawn, her confidence as flawless as her designer gown. She never glanced Evelyn's way again, or perhaps she didn't dare to. The reception was in full motion now. Music swirled, laughter sparkled, and the scent of roses mingled with the rich aroma of roasted lamb and champagne. To the untrained eye, the evening was perfect. Every flower was in place, every glass filled, every smile rehearsed to a mirror's perfection. But beneath the glittering facade, Evelyn Carter sat quietly at her table on the edge of the celebration, an island of calm in a sea of polished vanity. No one sat with her for long. A few guests stopped briefly out of obligation, their compliments brittle and their words empty. The conversation never lasted more than a few minutes before they drifted away toward louder laughter and more comfortable company. Evelyn didn't mind. She had lived long enough to recognize false politeness when she saw it. What struck her most wasn't cruelty, it was indifference. The way people looked through her as though she were part of the decor. When she looked toward Michael, however, she found warmth. Her grandson, in his dark suit and steady smile, was the only one whose sincerity glowed in this crowd of glittering pretense. He tried to keep up appearances, greeting guests, staying by Olivia's side, but his gaze found Evelyn again and again, each time carrying the same unspoken question, "Are you all right?" And each time she answered with a smile that said, "Always." Across the garden, Victoria Montgomery was in her element. The woman thrived under attention. She shone in the presence of wealth, her laughter bright and perfectly measured. Around her, a small court of relatives and socialites fluttered like moths to a flame. "Michael is quite charming, isn't he?" said one of the guests, a woman in a shimmering gown. Victoria tilted her head, smiling graciously. "Charming, yes. Though I suppose it's easy to be charming when you're marrying into the right family." A ripple of knowing laughter spread through the group. "And his grandmother?" another woman asked, lowering her voice as if the question itself were impolite. Victoria sipped her wine delicately before replying. "Oh, she's sweet. I imagine she's proud. Michael has certainly done well for himself, considering." "Considering what?" someone pressed, half teasing, half curious. Victoria's painted smile widened, her tone light as silk. "Considering where he started, dear. It's always admirable to see ambition rise above its circumstances." The women chuckled softly, their laughter careful, the kind that fills silence but not sincerity. Only a few feet away, Michael happened to pass by, just in time to hear the tail end of the remark. His shoulders stiffened. He wanted to speak up, to defend the woman who had raised him with patience and pride when the world offered neither. But he saw Evelyn sitting calmly across the garden, her posture straight, her expression serene, a pillar of quiet dignity, and he bit his tongue. Not yet. Dinner began under a canopy of lights strung between the oak trees. Silverware clinked, wine poured freely, and the low hum of conversation rose again. Evelyn ate slowly, not out of discomfort but reflection. She had attended countless events like this, where faces smiled and hearts hid. But this time the weight of history seemed heavier. Her mind drifted, as it sometimes did, to years long past, to a cramped kitchen where she had once worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table, To long nights when she'd helped Michael with his schoolwork while her hands still smelled of cleaning chemicals. The Montgomerys saw a grandmother. They did not see the story. They didn't know the cost of her calm. The thought made her smile faintly. People who worship wealth often forget how fragile it truly is. She was sipping her tea when she heard a familiar voice, low, commanding, and edged with self-satisfaction. Richard Montgomery was holding court at his table, surrounded by half a dozen men in dark suits. Their conversation wasn't about love or family or the joy of the wedding, it was about profits, partnerships, and politics. So much of success, Richard was saying, comes down to being in the right circles. Knowing who to speak to, who to avoid. There's a certain refinement that can't be taught. The men nodded, eager to agree. Evelyn's lips curved slightly. Refinement, she thought, was the one thing you couldn't fake, though many tried. She caught Richard's eye just as he turned, and for a brief second, he looked unsettled, as if something in her gaze reminded him of accountability. He quickly turned away. Later, as the first dances began, the night air cooled. The garden lights flickered softly, and Olivia and Michael glided across the marble dance floor to the sound of a live orchestra. Their movements were elegant, tender, real love in the midst of pretense. Guests watched with admiration, clapping politely when the song ended. Cameras flashed, laughter returned, and conversation resumed. Evelyn smiled as she watched. There was hope for this marriage, she thought. If they could learn to build a life on respect rather than status, perhaps they could break free from the arrogance that clung to the Montgomery name. She stood to stretch her legs, walking slowly toward the fountain near the edge of the property. The cool mist brushed against her skin and she inhaled deeply. From here she could see everything, the laughter, the glitter, the performance of wealth. And from here, it was easy to spot the man who'd been watching her earlier. He was seated alone now, a short distance from the dance floor, observing the crowd with quiet interest. His suit was immaculate but simple. His bearing was confident but not loud. When he noticed Evelyn's gaze, he inclined his head politely. She approached him with a small, knowing smile. "Lovely evening," she said. "Indeed," the man replied. His voice was smooth, refined, but carried an undercurrent of warmth. "Though I confess I'm enjoying the people watching more than the festivities." Evelyn chuckled softly. "I can understand that. You see more truth in the way people behave when they think no one important is watching." His smile deepened. "An astute observation, Mrs. Carter." Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "You know who I am." "I do," he said almost teasingly. "And I suspect you know who I am as well." For a moment, silence stretched between them, not awkward but charged with understanding. Evelyn studied him closely. "It's been a long time, hasn't it?" "Far too long," he said gently. "I almost didn't recognize you at first." "Age does that," she said, though her smile didn't fade. "Not to everyone," he replied. "Some people only grow more distinguished with time." Evelyn laughed quietly. "Flattery doesn't suit you, William." His eyes sparkled at the name. "So you do remember." "I never forget those who matter," she said simply. And with that, she turned back toward the celebration, leaving him to ponder her words. Inside the glowing tent, the Montgomerys continued their theater of hospitality. Toasts were made, laughter rose, and Victoria basked in the praise of her social circle. She was so caught up in her own sense of triumph that she didn't notice the quiet shift in atmosphere, the subtle curiosity spreading among the guests as they began to whisper about the distinguished man who had arrived late, who spoke with authority but kept to himself. Some thought he was a diplomat. Others guessed a CEO or philanthropist. No one seemed to know for sure. Victoria only noticed him when one of her friends whispered, "That gentleman near the fountain. He seems important. You should introduce yourself." Victoria's eyes lit with opportunity. She excused herself and glided through the crowd with perfect composure, her gown shimmering like moonlight. When she reached the fountain, she found the man still seated, calm and unreadable. "Good evening," she said sweetly. "I don't believe we've met. I'm Victoria Montgomery, the bride's mother." The man looked up and smiled politely. "A pleasure, Mrs. Montgomery." She extended a hand. "I hope you're enjoying the evening." "I am," he said. "Though the true highlight is yet to come." Victoria tilted her head, intrigued. "And what might that be?" "You'll see," he said with a faint, mysterious smile. She blinked, unsure how to respond, and when she turned to look for someone, perhaps to introduce him properly, she realized Evelyn was standing a short distance away watching them both. The music had stopped. The clinking of glasses, the hum of conversation, even the whisper of the evening wind seemed to still. All eyes were on the man standing beside Evelyn Carter. The name alone carried a quiet thunder, whispered through the crowd like a revelation. The Montgomerys, who prided themselves on their prestige and connections, were struck speechless. Every guest who had ignored Evelyn earlier now stared at her as though seeing her for the first time. She sat motionless, her calm unbroken. Only her eyes revealed something deeper, not pride, not triumph, but something gentler. Understanding. William smiled faintly, addressing the stunned crowd. "I hope you'll forgive my interruption," he said, his voice measured and composed. "I hadn't planned to speak tonight. But when I arrived and saw the woman sitting alone at this table, I was reminded that gratitude, like love, should never go unspoken." A murmur swept through the guests. Evelyn didn't move. William continued, his gaze fixed on her. "Many of you know me by reputation. Few know me by story. I wasn't born into comfort. I worked my way from factory floors to boardrooms. And along the way there were a handful of people who shaped the man I became. This woman," he gestured to Evelyn, "was one of them." Evelyn's lips curved into a quiet, knowing smile. Victoria Montgomery looked as though the ground had vanished beneath her. Richard's expression was unreadable, his hand tightening around his glass. Olivia and Michael exchanged bewildered glances. William's voice softened. "When I was young, struggling to make ends meet, Evelyn Carter gave me my first chance. I was barely more than a boy, angry, hungry, and reckless. She hired me when no one else would. Taught me discipline, respect, and dignity. She believed in me when I hadn't yet learned to believe in myself." He paused, letting the silence stretch. "Years later, when success finally found me, I searched for her, to thank her. But she'd moved on, building her own life, raising her grandson with the same grace she once showed me. I never forgot her, though. And tonight, by pure chance, I discovered that her grandson had married into the Montgomery family." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Victoria's hand trembled as her wine glass tipped, spilling crimson liquid across her ivory gown. William looked directly at her now. "You have a beautiful daughter," he said politely. "A fine young man for a son-in-law. But it seems your family has forgotten that greatness doesn't come from birthright, it comes from character." His words weren't loud, but they landed with the force of a sermon. No one spoke. Even the waiters had stopped moving. Evelyn's eyes softened. "William," she said gently, "there's no need for all that." He turned to her, smiling. "Perhaps not. But sometimes the truth must be spoken aloud, if only to remind those who've forgotten their manners." Evelyn chuckled softly, a sound that carried more warmth than mockery. "You always did have a flair for drama." "Learned it from you," he replied. Laughter rippled faintly through the guests, nervous, uncertain, but genuine enough to break the spell. William extended his hand toward her. "May I?" Evelyn hesitated, then placed her hand in his. Together they walked toward the dance floor. The crowd parted instinctively, silent in their awe. The band, sensing the moment, began to play again, a slow, soulful tune. And there, beneath the golden lights and blooming roses, Evelyn Carter danced, her steps graceful, her smile serene, her years melting away in the rhythm of memory. William guided her with quiet reverence, every movement a tribute to a bond forged long before wealth had ever entered the picture. Around them whispers grew. Who is she really? She must have been someone important. She is someone important. Victoria could no longer meet anyone's gaze. Her face was pale, her elegance unraveling. Richard leaned toward her, voice low. "You've embarrassed us." Her eyes flashed. "Me? I didn't." But the look in his eyes silenced her. For the first time that evening, the Montgomery matriarch had nothing to say. When the dance ended, the crowd erupted into hesitant applause, uncertain, then swelling with sincerity. Evelyn dipped her head modestly and returned to her seat. William remained beside her, speaking softly. "I never got the chance to thank you properly," he said. "So allow me now." "There's nothing to thank me for," Evelyn replied, her tone gentle but firm. "You did the work. You made the choices. I only offered a bit of guidance." He smiled. "And that made all the difference." Michael approached then, his eyes wide with emotion. You knew him?" Evelyn nodded. "A long time ago." William turned to Michael, extending his hand. "Your grandmother is the finest person I've ever known. You're a fortunate man, Michael Carter." Michael shook his hand, still stunned. "I know, sir. I've always known." Olivia stepped forward timidly, her cheeks flushed. "Mrs. Carter?" Evelyn turned toward her, her smile kind but weary. "There's no need, dear." But Olivia persisted. "There is. Her voice trembled. I should have done more tonight. I should have made sure you felt welcome. I'm so sorry. Evelyn reached out, brushing a tear from her cheek. Child, forgiveness is easy when the heart is sincere. And I can see yours is. Olivia nodded, her eyes wet. Thank you. Victoria stood a few steps away, frozen, her pride warring with shame. Finally, she forced herself to approach. Mrs. Carter, she began, her tone strained, I owe you an apology. That my behavior this evening was inexcusable. Evelyn regarded her quietly. Yes, she said simply. The bluntness hit harder than any insult. Victoria's composure cracked. I didn't realize who you were. Evelyn's gaze sharpened slightly. And would it have mattered if I were no one? Victoria hesitated, her lips parting, but no words came. That's the trouble with pride, Evelyn said softly. It makes you see names before faces, fortunes before hearts. She sighed then, not out of anger but out of sadness. I've met your kind before, Mrs. Montgomery. The world teaches you that wealth defines worth. But life has a way of correcting such lessons, sooner or later. Victoria's eyes glistened. You're right. Evelyn nodded. I know. She turned back to William, who was watching the exchange with quiet approval. Come, William. Sit with me a while. Let them dance. And so they did. For the next hour, the atmosphere shifted completely. The stiffness dissolved. Conversations became real, laughter natural. Even the Montgomerys, shaken but humbled, began to thaw. William stayed by Evelyn's side, and every guest who approached them did so with genuine respect. The same people who had ignored her earlier now sought her attention, her words, her warmth. But Evelyn's grace never wavered. She spoke to each person with equal kindness, no matter who they were. When the evening drew to a close and the final song faded into the night, Michael and Olivia approached her once more. I'll walk you to your car, Michael offered. She smiled. That's sweet but unnecessary. I think William intends to see me home. William chuckled. I wouldn't dream of letting her go alone. Michael nodded, smiling faintly. I'm glad you came, Grandma. Tonight. I learned something I'll never forget. Evelyn tilted her head. And what's that, child? That dignity, he said slowly, doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. Her smile deepened. Then you learned well. Olivia leaned forward, embracing her gently. Thank you for your grace, she whispered. Grace is a gift meant to be shared, Evelyn murmured. Make sure your home has plenty of it. As Evelyn and William made their way toward the waiting car, the night air was cool and fragrant with roses. Do you think they learned anything tonight? William asked quietly. Evelyn chuckled. Maybe not everything. But it's a start. He smiled. Still the teacher I see. She looked up at the stars, her expression thoughtful. Life has a way of teaching through humility. I just let it speak. William opened the car door for her, bowing his head slightly. You always did. She paused before stepping in, glancing back toward the glowing estate, where the lights still shimmered and laughter still lingered faintly in the air. Funny thing about people like that, she said softly. They build walls to keep others out. But sometimes the only thing those walls hold in is emptiness. William smiled. And you, Evelyn Carter, walk through them as if they were made of glass. She laughed. Because they are. The car door closed gently. The engine started. As they drove away, the Montgomery estate receded into the distance, its grandeur fading beneath the vast, indifferent stars. And Evelyn Carter, the woman they had once overlooked, sat in quiet peace, not victorious but vindicated. Because true dignity doesn't demand recognition. It simply endures. And on that night, beneath a sky full of silent witnesses, the lesson was learned, not by words but by grace.